just concluded round two and round three, which is day two of the NFL draft. The Dolphins were extremely active on this wonderful evening, and we'll get into why each of us thinks that this was a great night for Dolphins. We're going to start off kind of like we did last night, kind of going through what we've done. Oscar and I are here to indulge you in draft knowledge, hopefully, so make sure you send in questions and comments, and we'll take them into consideration if we have time throughout the show. We like to kind of take our time and make this enjoyable. So, Oscar, why don't you kick us off and kind of tell us a little bit about what you noticed in the first set of that second round pick area.
Well, I guess kind of like someone everyone was looking at, or it was kind of like an O-line run at the beginning that kind of thought may have happened at the end of the first round and happened a bit later with Ciafulo and Joel Bitonio. I guess that was it. And then Weston Richburg. And so that kind of, maybe it's kind of solidifies the idea that the tackles weren't as coveted as some people thought. And I think Ciafulo is a great pick for the Texans if they're kind of just going best player available and they're getting really good players. So I think he really helps. The Marcus Lawrence pick I really liked. I think that was a really nice move up by the Cowboys, and finding like a player of big need. They obviously got rid of DeMarcus Ware's massive cap hit, and I don't think that they're obviously not going to get the same production, but I had Lawrence as like a high late first, so I think he'll be really good. He's like one of the best in his class at transitioning speed into power. That's kind of like, I think if you've got that as one of your edge rushers, that's a pretty good start. And then Joel Bitonio, I think he was like another player people were looking at potentially 50. Kind of, most people see him as like a swing player, but I think with the size parameters Miami have, perhaps they would have seen him predominantly as a interior lineman. I know some people have talked about him even being a center. I think that's generally if you have got quick enough feet and can move both ways and you're smart. Centers kind of, and you're kind of like versatile. Centers like a position where you kind of covet it quite a bit. Those kind of intangible qualities. So that could be one reason. I think with the Browns, he'll probably be, obviously with Mac, he'll be a guard. And that's going to be a pretty good offensive line for Johnny Football to throw to no one. I think Derek Carr's pretty good value. Obviously, we'll see him week 4 in London, so I'll be live at that game. So hopefully, whether he'll be playing or Matt Schaub, that'll be an interesting kind of story to follow. I think Carr's got really good. There's almost opposite quarterbacks. If you think of like Carr's arm strength and Schwab's just play action, toss it about a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see schematically how they kind of manage that differential in style and talent. Is there anything, and then Rashad Hageman, who I'm a huge fan of, I think Falcons got a really disruptive player there, and their plan kind of was to get more physical and in the trenches, and I think they went with a polished player in Matthews in the first, and Rashad Hageman, they just got an athletic beast who could be really, really, really good.
Yeah, I agree. I thought the Lawrence pick was not surprising because of the talent there for the Cowboys. I kind of tweeted out that, this would be the perfect time to take him. Like you said, he's like that end of the first round type of talent. That was a really great value for them, even though they gave up a third-round pick to move up. I think that he's a guy that's going to come in and maybe he's not a 10-sack-a-year player because that's an extremely good player if you can get that type of production, but that team definitely needs to improve that defense, and I thought that was a great pick. Very un-Cowboy-like first couple rounds, filling their needs, especially for that value. The Browns taking Joel Bitonio, that was a great pick for them. They run a zone blocking scheme as we do. I think he's going to step in and be a guard. I saw some speculation that he might be a tackle for them, but it kind of depends on your philosophies on the guard position or on the tackle position as far as length. So that'll be a great pickup for them. And like you said with the Raiders, I think that was a perfect fit from what people were saying on Twitter. Carr was their number one quarterback, so to get him in the second round is phenomenal, no matter what you think of him. I'm not a huge Carr fan just because of his poise is such a major topic. However, he was my third-rated quarterback, so I'm at pick 36. That's a no-brainer decision. Hageman, the fact that he went to the Falcons really says a lot about what the Falcons want to do. They are definitely transitioning to a 3-4, which I think people speculated, but I know that people that follow them closely and cover them, even at some of the more reputable sites, we're talking about how Nolan more likes hybrid fronts. Well, now that they have Soliai, Hageman, and then all the other free agents that they signed, I don't think there's a doubt that it's going to be a heavy 3-4 dose.
I think Soliai and Hageman, that's almost like Soliai Starks, and kind of. So I think you can run multiple fronts, and they were pretty much 50-50 last year, and they don't really have. So I think they can still. I think they will still be multiple. Partly because I think maybe there'll be a three-man front base, but there's so much nickel now that it doesn't really matter. They're going to be pretty much 50-50. And I think that's maybe why they coveted Solai so much, because he can two-gap from zero tech, and also he's had 2 years experience at one tech, so he can do it all. And then maybe they're even trying to replicate what they had, in Miami with Solai and Starks with Hageman. So that kind of makes sense, trying to replicate that partnership. Because I think that's kind of an interesting comp for Hageman and Starks, that kind of size disruption. So that could perhaps be. So I don't necessarily going straight for a 3-4. I don't think there's many teams that are straight one front anymore, apart from like the odd Tampa 2 team. That's about it, really.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they work that out. I mean, for the value to get a guy like that at pick 37, when you talk about inconsistency on tape, yes, he did, but the fact is that he probably played 80 to 90% of his snaps for that defense, and that's not going to happen ever in the NFL. These defensive linemen rotate, so it's not a big deal if he comes off the field and only plays 400 to 500 snaps.
And he's playing Minnesota on an awful team. I watched a couple of their games live, and it's just bloody torture watching their offense. So you're just sitting there watching this absolute garbage, and then you have to go out there and like try and ball out. And it's like, what's the point? So I can kind of see like why you'd be disheartened and just be like, well, every once in a while I'll go like hit that guy in the back, but otherwise I'm just going to chill for a bit. No one else is doing anything. So I can kind of understand, obviously you want, like, Donald at Pitt, he would ball out, but he just liked to do that. Maybe when it's colder, and, maybe it's not that colder in Minnesota, but, yeah, I don't really blame him. And, yeah, interior defensive linemen aren't going to get the same kind of workload or matchups he was in Minnesota. So they go down, and then there's kind of back-to-back picks that people kind of coveted at 50 with ACG and AJS and Marquise Lee. I think to the Bucks and Jaguars, I think it's pretty interesting. The Bucks going huge for. It's going to be ridiculous.
Luke McCown.
Yeah, it's just going to be, they're playing basketball, so that'll be really interesting to see. Obviously, we played them in pre-season, so that'll be a challenge for the linebacker core. Whether we see any additions later on or not, but that will be a test whether they've developed at all in their kind of coverage skills, which was potentially one of the weaker parts of that middle group of the defense. And Marquise Lee, I think a lot of people were saying he fell due to a knee injury or like knee concerns. And I think this is kind of like where Jaguars can take that risk of going with like relatively low risk. I mean, the worst you're going to get is like a number two receiver, and you could get a breakaway like number one receiver. So I think it's kind of worth the value there. So I really like those picks, and I think also if you watch Jaguars play, their defense is really like up tempo and exciting, and the offense last year was just so flat. And so Marquise Lee, he'll kill himself to get the ball, and he's always smiling. He kind of brings kind of maybe some more attitude or like enthusiasm to that offense. So I think for just kind of like a motivational or like a like way to get kind of that offense fired up, he could be a really good pick for them.
Yeah, for sure. I'm surprised that he fell so far. I guess injuries might have been the reason, um, maybe why, but it'll be interesting to see how he develops in time and can
Yeah, a
affect
lot of
that.
people say it's the drops, but then he has the same amount of drops as Ebron last year with almost the exact same amount of targets. So you can't give one person. And I mean, Marquise Lee had two quarterbacks sharing reps, and they're both pretty awful. So he had more excuses than Ebron. Ebron just forgot about catching the ball and wanted to hurdle someone.
Yeah, and I mean Lee's a guy that, at his best he's just going to be a monster whether you put him at the number two or you put him in the slot, depending on your offensive philosophy. Um, Lee, he can just. I'm kind of torn on him because I could see him being the next big receiver, and I could see him being a flop. And it's crazy to say that because his freshman year he was so good, and as a sophomore he was so good. Um, but this past year, I mean, just being banged up, I think my only concerns with him are really injuries and drops. But like you said, I mean, it's really hard to focus in a situation that he was in. And you watch him play, he was in position. He usually catches with his hands. When you chart out his catches, or at least his attempted catches, most of his are hand catches and not letting it get to his body. So I think he's going to translate well, and he could, especially with, like you said, Cecil Shorts, if Justin Blackman can come back, plus whoever else they had. Didn't they take I think they took another. Did they take another receiver tonight?
Oh yeah, they took Allen Robinson as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I mean that's going to be loaded. If Blake Bortles can do anything, um, maybe not this year, but next year, that's going to be a really nice team, at least on paper. Obviously, we talked about Bortles last night, but so I think they're on a good start to building something there. Kind of jumping down, we saw. Let's see who's notable. Let's talk about the Bills taking Cyrus Kouandjio. This was an option for the Dolphins for many people at 19. Obviously, we weren't big fans of his in comparison to the national media. What are your thoughts on Kouandjio being in the division now?
Well, I think it's going to be fun to watch kind of the next couple of years, Dion Jordan, Cam Wake being him up. I think I mean, he's super young, so he's got kind of like the arm length that you like, and his feet move quickly. They're like little pistons, but I think his lateral agility isn't great. His hip movement, so it's kind of his feet are doing the right stuff, and then it's kind of the middle looks awkward, and the hands are doing the right stuff. And too often you see him kind of up in the air, where he just gets jacked up. He pops up quite high. But that's something that's kind of consistent with all college O linemen at the moment. It seems to be a trait or a technique aspect that they don't really mind. I think maybe they want them to get up and see everything in front of them early, so they kind of let them get up instead of getting in a place where they can get better leverage. But yeah, I think that will be. I'm pretty excited for that kind of matchup for the Dolphins offense. I think, the Dolphins defense to kind of really attack that side of the line, especially like the next year coming. Obviously, I think we play the Bills a bit later. Oh, we played in week 2, so that'll be maybe a good litmus test for kind of what shape Wake's coming in at and how serviceable Cyrus was and whether he should have been the pick at 19 or not, which I kind of doubt. And if we move, I guess there's maybe talk about the Jets and Jason Morrow. I think I saw a couple of people on Twitter freaking out that the Jets are loaded now. I don't think they're anywhere near that. Amaro is kind of like, I mean, he's like a tweener tight end. To me, he's not really much of a. I mean, I like him. I think he's good. I had him and Ebron like pretty much a hair's breadth, but I didn't really have Ebron as high as most people. Um, I think he's a good athlete, but he has no spectacular traits. For his size, he was never really asked to be in line that much. I think he was split out the most of any tight ends, of like the top 5 or 6 tight ends in this class. And so that aspect of his game is going to have to be worked on quite a bit. But yeah, again, it's an area of weakness for the Miami Dolphins is coverage against linebackers. So perhaps that'll be something to look out for. But I think as long as the safeties are being able to cover up there and shouldn't be able to get touchdowns. I mean, he's not a great red zone threat. He's more you hit him in deep seams or he's. I think there's an interesting thing with last spring he was working with Wes Welker. I think that's kind of a nice comp for him. It's kind of like he's just a massive version of Wes Welker. So it's without maybe as much like elusiveness and yak.
Yeah, I thought, that was a guy I think Miami might have stayed at 50. Or actually, am I looking at the right thing? Yeah, so they took him at 49, Jason Morrow. I think at 50, I think the Dolphins might have taken him just because they could have used Charles Clay a lot more effectively. I thought that as good as Clay was last year, he was out of position, obviously, and that makes things difficult for an offense when you've got, an H-back playing all over, a tight end, and he's really more of like a slot type of guy that you can do a little bit of everything for. So, and that's not a negative. I mean, that's a positive. That's amazing what Charles Clay accomplished last year for Miami, and he's a definite asset. But if you would have had Jason Morrow on the board, I think that's a guy that you don't miss. I think it's funny if people said, as I wasn't on Twitter for most of the night because we were so busy moving up and down, but for people to say that the Jets are loaded, they've added some nice pieces. Not prior, but they've had Morrow's a nice piece. But I mean, they don't have anyone to get the ball to him, and he's not a guy that stretches the field. So the way he's going to hurt Miami is because Miami can't tackle. So I think that's going to be the most difficult part for Miami covering him. I mean, Amaro's a nice player, but ultimately you got to have a quarterback that can get it to him.
And then we come to the first trade in the second round. Moved down with the Chargers came up to get a Tachi, the linebacker, pass rusher. So I think that was a good move on the Chargers' point. I think he was kind of the one that pass rusher that fell that's really talented. And the Dolphins acquired was it a 4th round pick for that?
Yeah, we got pick number 125 overall.
So I think that was a pretty. I mean, there was a couple of trades beforehand that I think they moved around a similar amount of spots for a 3rd round pick, if I'm not mistaken. But obviously, as you go further down the draft, the premier players aren't there as much, and you've got less competition to move up. So that value inherently drops. But I think when I was looking at the board, I think there was 3 players that I kind of had my eye on as targeting, and they were still there when they fell down. 3 more, I think, other than Devontae Adams went, so perhaps they were hoping he would fall down to 25 when then they moved back down again with the 49ers. So do you think, or Troy Nicholas, do you think either of those were targets that we're hoping would go down to 57 or would have taken that deal to move back down again?
I originally had thought that, yes, that those guys would have been targets for the Dolphins. However, um, looking at who they took in hindsight, I'm not sure if those guys would have been targets. We'll get to who the Dolphins took here in a minute. At the time, you
They
look
spent
at
time visiting with Devontae Adams, so I can imagine he was a target. We've seen kind of that as a trend with Juwan James anyway. They spent a lot of time visiting him and his teammates, and there was a lot of rumours about several Tennessee players at the combine being talked to by Dolphins staff. So I think with this draft anyway, they kind of used visits on actual targets. We'll talk about that, I guess, as we go down to actual players picked. So I could imagine Devontae Adams was a serious target for them. I didn't remember them being linked to Troy Nicholas, so, and his floor is similar to the ceiling of Dion Sims, so potentially that may not be of interest because of drafting him last year.
Yeah, I would have loved to see him take Adams. Adams is a guy that I've got like top 10, I think overall. I'd have to check my board, but I've got him like top 15 for sure in this class, and a lot of that is projection, obviously. Um, so I think he would have been a fantastic pick, but he's a project. I'm not going to lie. He doesn't run complete route tree, very limited exposure to a pro style offense. So I can understand. You look at where Miami went with their pick, and it makes actually a lot of sense why they didn't go with Adams. Um, he's more of a long-term pick, and I think what we were shown tonight is that Miami might not be focused on the long term as much because, kind of as we had talked about before, there's a feeling that they've got to win now. So Nicholas, I think, would have played well into that. Um, Maybe not as well as we had thought, but then again, they may not have expected the Cardinals to take him. So I thought those were targets, those guys that would have been targets, but ultimately they must not have been big enough targets because a fourth round pick is nice, but it's not fantastic either.
And then I guess we can go. There's a couple we saw like the running backs with Sankey going to the Titans. I think that's a really good fit, and he'll probably be like have a great time there. His kind of like burst vision will work really well on that Wiz Hunt offense. And then we saw Hill, Hyde. Well, obviously, this 49ers came up to pick 57 to pick Hyde. And then after that, dropping down to 63, Allen Robinson went. So do you think he would have been a player in which they were targeted as well, higher than their eventual pick?
Yeah, I think that was the target. I do actually think that was the target for when Miami traded down the first time. Um, I'm surprised, or I would have thought he would have been the target, but then they traded down again, and the Jaguars moved out for Robinson, and you just look at what he brings to the table, and it would make sense that he'd be a target. He'd be able to contribute right away, and then you'd hope to move him to the outside receiver. He's like almost like a Brandon Gibson with more yards after catch ability, if that makes sense.
And he's really kind of the way I've always described him. He's kind of good at everything, and hasn't really learned how to use his body yet. He hasn't really learned how to. He runs good routes, not crisp. He was in a really complex Bill O'Brien route system, so he projects well in the kind of mental side of the game. But physically, he's really young, doesn't really know how to do everything. Has some mental errors occasionally. But yeah, I thought he would have been a nice pick. I think he was one of my three players I had kind of like targeted for around this area as we're moving down. And so the eventual pick at was it 63 was Jarvis Landry, who I had pretty much the same grade as Allen Robinson. So on my board, they're pretty much graded out the same, although I have kind of a preference. I had Robinson higher due to kind of like that size and versatility inside and outside, and maybe a slightly higher ceiling.
Yeah, I like Landry a lot. kind of like just like you talked about, there's that perceived ceiling, higher ceiling and whatever. And I mean, it is what it is. The Dolphins didn't take a number one receiver, and you kind of live with that. And as I had said, it just kind of addresses the mindset that the coaching staff has this year, and obviously the front office, that they need to get instant production out of guys. Landry's going to bring a lot to the table as far as consistency, which is something Miami hasn't had at wide receiver. I don't know really. I can't think of the last time they've had a player like Landry. Maybe Chris Chambers. I mean, obviously Chambers was a much better athlete, much
I think
quicker,
Landry
but
is an underrated athlete. I think his combine numbers kind of aren't a true reflection. And when you watch him, he looks the same speed as Odell Beckham. Obviously, Odell Beckham tested far better, but game speeds they look pretty similar. I think one thing you're getting with Landry is he's pretty much a finished product, and he drops nothing. He has huge hands. I think he has bigger hands than I think even Logan Thomas. So that's like a huge for like a relatively diminutive player. I mean, he's 5'11", he's not that small. I think he will be a slot receiver predominantly, but then maybe he's going to be kind of a move player in the same way in which if Cooks was a target or even Odell Beckham, they're kind of similar size. I think he's a bit thicker and a bit more resilient to that ball across the middle and catching in traffic. So that's quite an interesting asset. And yeah, he'll kill himself to get the ball, and he can high point the ball and catch contested catches. So I think that's an element that we haven't seen. I think a while ago I was kind of charting the running game, and just every a couple of overthrows you'd see, and it'll be a ball about a yard in front of the receiver, and they're running, they're not laying out for it or even attempting to catch it, and that's something you're not going to see with Landry at all. He's going to fly head first to the ball.
yeah, for sure, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on the current wide receiver core. And I tried to touch on that in my Bleacher Report article about how Landry fits. And I was just, and as a side note, I was just looking at my big board and actually had Landry as my number 8 receiver, as a solid mid-second round pick above guys like Moncrief, even Allen Robinson, and even above Marquise Lee. So I didn't realize I even had him that high because I kind of didn't expect Miami to take him. But I'm happy that they did. So,
There's really
like
a quote from Hickey that I read. I haven't watched the press conference yet, but he said he was asked about what he thought when he saw Landry's 40 time, and he said it was a great opportunity. So I think although they've been talking about kind of analytics as being a key element of the evaluation process, clearly they preference tape first over analytics or physical and athletic attributes. So that's relatively promising. Otherwise, you're drafting Central Henderson really high every year. So I think that's kind of perhaps it's an indicator. Maybe we'll see further down the line as we get into the later rounds, kind of whether that trend carries over. But I think that's kind of promising that he saw a player that they had rated highly and kind of something they could isolate as being a reason for them being dropped unreasonably and taking advantage of that. So that's quite interesting. And I remember Mayock had Landry as his 5th wide receiver before the combine, and then after the combine he dropped to 10. So you can see how, although he claims it's all about the film, clearly in short matters.
that's surprising that he dropped him because I remember watching the combine live, especially for that pick, and he had said that wasn't going to bother him at all. So that's surprising that he actually did move him down. I mean, the 40 time I didn't even care about because he plays faster than that. He's probably a mid 4.5 guy. I think he ran maybe low 4.6 in his pro day.
Yeah, it was 4.51, but that probably means a 4.6.
Yeah, but you look at his game and it just doesn't matter. Like you look at players sometimes and you can just tell like, okay, this guy brings this, and this to the table. Like Jarvis Landry, we always knew he's not going to be a guy that runs a 9 route like Mike Wallace. It's just he doesn't need to do that. That's not his role. So it's okay that he runs a 4.6. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, Jerry Rice ran a 4.6 because that's just ridiculous. But it just shows that a guy like Anquan Bolden can run he probably runs like a 4.9 right now, and it doesn't matter because he has great body control, extremely good hands. He's a good blocker. He just does all of the little things, and that's what Landry brings to the table.
I think the last thing you brought up, the blocking, is a really important factor, and that's something we saw kind of with the Philadelphia Eagles picks with Matthews and Huff. They block on the outside really well on DBs, and if the outside running game is becoming more prominent and we see more kind of like a 50-50 split in the run game, you want to have more willing kind of blockers in the run game or in the screen game. If you're, say, going to use Wallace more or there's a scat back involved at some point, you want to have those players that don't mind getting dirty and already have that in their arsenal. You don't need to coach that into them.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm definitely excited to see Landry play. Honestly, I might buy his jersey, like counterfeit, obviously, not like a real expensive one. But if I can get my hands on like a cheap jersey of his, man, like he's going to be a fan favorite for the next 10 years if he can stay healthy, which is the big question with him because he takes huge shots. He's just one of those guys that he's kind of like Wes Welker in that he literally wants that ball more than anything in the world, and that's why I think fans are going to really love him. So I think that was a really good pick. Like if you gave that a grade, I gave that a B+, considering all of the trades that they did too. What would you give the Dolphins for Jarvis Landry and the trades that they did?
Probably around like a B+, A-. So I kind of think it's people don't perceive it as a position of need, but when you're looking at that, you kind of have to look forward a year or two as to what the contract situations are, and in 2 years, a year is going to be a position of need. So if you have depth in that position, you invest in that position earlier, it doesn't become as you're not reaching for it, as we've seen with potentially the O-line. You don't have any depth, you don't have anyone behind, you don't have anything there, so you have to force to make that work. So by getting the play you wanted, the value you like, that makes sense to me. And he was, as I said, he was even grades as my top wide receiver, and I had maybe 4 or 5 players graded above. So I thought that was a fine pick. And then there's obviously 3 picks between, and we finally saw Morgan Moses come off the board in the 3rd round, in the 2nd pick of the 3rd round to the Redskins, and so he took quite a meteoric fall from potentially being the 18th, 19th pick, or even some people are saying the Ravens would take him at 17, and fell all the way down to 66. So do you think that's going to ease any Dolphin fans' kind of trepidation over Juwan James and the supposed reach when we didn't really see any tackles go in that kind of area? Maybe it says more about the tackles behind Juwan James more than anything else.
I think, it's not just the Dolphins fan base. I think it's, normal for people to look at the draft, and they've got their own personal preference, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it is what it is. People prefer Moses because he was probably more pro-ready, even though he wasn't a terrific fit for what we're wanting to do when you compare his quickness and those type of traits when you compare it to Juwan James. But ultimately, Morgan Moses fell to the 66th pick because teams are petrified that he doesn't have any elite traits. He's not a great athlete, and the medicals scare the crap out of teams. I mean, it's obvious because you look at the tape, and it's hard to argue that he's not at least an early 2nd round tackle in this group when you look at just the tape. But obviously there must have been concerns. To fall to 66 is a great value, but there's that major caveat that, I mean, there must be something going on medically. So I think Dolphins fans shouldn't be worried about it. The Dolphins got their guy. I mean, we've got a great offensive line coach, and if he recognized James as the top of that second tier tackles, I mean, I don't know who I am to argue that. I mean, we have to see it on the field play out at that point.
I think also if you consider Laser was his offensive coordinator for 3 years, I've heard rumours that he kind of struggled with weight issues and he had to go to JUCO first. He went to the military academy before he could become eligible to go to UVA, so perhaps there's some kind of issues there. And I know some teams kind of frown upon that, but he did graduate with degrees, and he was studying for a degree during the off season. So potentially, I know sometimes we also see with like Lewis Nix, he dropped, and a lot of people kind of questioned his weight issues. I think generally, if you have kind of a fluctuation of weight during a couple of years of a college program, that's often interpreted as having not really a passion for football or not a strong work ethic. So maybe that's kind of something that they took to heart as they wanted someone that they knew was going to work and be ready for day one, because that's what they needed. And then we saw another trade up with the Raiders, and we gave up, so it was 81, and then I think it was 114. So I think that's relatively good value to move up quite far, similar to the Dion Jordan trade in respect to where the picks were. We had 2 picks in the 4th round. We're moving up around the same amount to get to the 3rd pick, albeit this time in the 3rd round instead of the 1st. But the same result happened for me. Last year I got my top player, Dion Jordan, and this year I got one player. If I could have any player on the Dolphins, it was Billy Turner, and we got Billy Turner. And I'm so excited. And this, literally, I mean, I can't explain how beautiful this guy is to watch play football. If he just is an incredible athlete. His feet, his legs, he's just like a Greek god that just moves so quickly, and just watching him, it's so fucking beautiful. And if I was probably drafting, I would have moved down in the 1st and picked him in the 1st. I would have probably even picked him at 19. I think he'll be a left tackle at some point. I mean, he is really, really good. I think he'll play. I mean, at the Senior Bowl, he was talking about he wanted to play in guard, and he's really raw technically. The coaches were basically watching the Senior Bowl coverage. They were basically teaching him how to punch, what steps to make. I mean, you were obviously there live, so maybe you can talk about kind of like how you saw the interaction with coaches and how he took on coaching. Because I think that's one. He is going to be raw, but then that's almost what you want when you have a John Benton and a Bicknell, is you want just an athletic piece of clay that you can just turn into. I think he'll be a left tackle in 3 years. I've got no doubt about that. And he'll be a day one starter, right guard, and now Dallas Thompson's a swing tackle. So, I mean, everyone should be happy.
Yeah, I mean, this was a home run pick. Literally, when I saw them trade up, I was like, okay, because I was really worried because Chris Borland was on the board. When they kept dropping down in the 2nd round, I actually thought to myself, shit, they're going to be taking Chris Borland, and I'm going to take my computer and just kill someone with it. That's like the one guy I wanted no part of in this draft. So when I saw Billy Turner flash, my tweet of Billy with a million explanation points was just exactly how I felt. I'm not as high as you are as far as left tackle potential, but that's not a negative. I don't say that as something that's should be taken as, oh, this guy's not a great player or a great pick. He's a fantastic pick.
He's a bit undersized for left tackle, but I mean, Benton's ran with undersized tackles with that kind of athleticism. I mean, even Philbin had Newhouse, who was undersized and he was shit, but they kind of lived with it. So I do think they do have a side preference, but I think when you have kind of like elite traits that Billy has, you can live with that kind of undersized. And yeah, I mean, I'm so happy.
Yeah, I mean, and what I saw at the Senior Bowl was, I saw a lot of progress because at the start of the week they had him at a tackle position, and literally the only thing I had written down was that his technique just isn't there yet to be a really good tackle. Just needs to get leverage better, needs to, use his functional strength more effectively because he's got it. He shows it in the run game that he's tremendously strong. He just has to learn how to use it now, be able to transfer that. Once he be able, and actually once he's able to do that, I'm kind of talking myself into why he can become a tackle. um, but I mean, whether he becomes a tackle or not, this is a fantastic value. You're looking at the 67th pick in the draft. I think last year, I think Turner's a guy pushing the first round, and it's just you look at the athleticism again, and like you said, I mean, look at Morgan Moses. Bill Lazor taught him, or at least coached him, and maybe he thought he was fully maxed out, and that might have been why the Dolphins passed on him. You look at Billy Turner, there's no way he's maxed out. I mean, we saw progress in 1 week at the Senior Bowl because he's actually finally getting decent coaching. Now you're putting him with arguably the best offensive line coach in the NFL. I mean, I'm not going to say the sky's the limit, but you would assume that this guy's going to be able to make those leaps. And I put in my BR article about how he fits with the Dolphins that he might not be able to start week 1, but I'd be surprised if he doesn't. The only reason he wouldn't is because Dallas Thomas has gotten that much better. And to be honest, I'm not too rosy about that because they just took a third-round guard. So they must feel pretty good about him. And I'm A plus 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 draft pick. This is my favorite pick of the draft by far for Miami.
What do you think about kind of their moving up just behind Morgan Moses? So they obviously felt that Moses he was kind of like they were waiting for him to go, and then that's when they saw that, oh, there may be a kick start on tackles happen now. And I think after we saw, did Newhart go beforehand to the Colts? I think he did. So that's really interesting. So Newhart went first and then Moses, so I think that's really interesting, kind of how that works out. I think Newhart maybe is going to play inside first as well. I can't remember, but maybe, yeah, I think he'll probably play guard for the Colts day 1, but we'll see. They need as much help as they can in that kind of area. So I think that was quite interesting that they isolated kind of like Moses we think teams will covet him more than Billy, and then once he goes, we need to go get up our guy.
Yeah, I mean it is strange that they went up right after Moses. Maybe it's just how it fell. I mean, I don't know. It seems like kind of weird luck if it was luck, but
the kind of a Philburn Green Bay connection with the Oakland front office, so potentially that is kind of like a mutual benefit to both of them. Maybe they wanted to move out, and there was kind of both teams kind of had enough value. Maybe Hickey was talking to a team maybe a bit lower or something that they thought they could still get him, but with the Dion Jordan trade, and this kind of like I think it was really good. I think it was still good value for both teams. It was pretty much even. It was just so it was the Dolphins' 4th-round pick, but we still have the San Diego's 4th-round pick. So you basically just flipped that 4th-round pick to move up. So I don't think there's too much issue with that, especially as kind of seeing the reaches that have kind of happened below in this round. Still a lot of like talents falling, and this is kind of what we talked about on the last show, kind of about how we've seen here almost in the end of the second day, where it's becoming more about scheme fit and looking for particular traits that translate to what you want to do as a football team more so, or kind of an area you want to attack. So we've kind of seen certain teams go towards getting bigger, stronger in the trenches, some getting bigger outside, and some wanting to be able to score points over Jacksonville.
Yeah, what do you think about Marcus Martin going 3rd round to the 49ers? That's one guy I didn't expect at all to fall to the 3rd round. I actually had a higher grade on Martin than I did Billy Turner, but I like the Turner fit better for Miami because he's a little bit nastier, a little bit more plug and play at that guard position. I think that Martin needs a little bit more strength and he needs some time to get the same type of technique work that Turner needs. Uh, who would have you picked between the two? I mean, I know you're high, I think you're really, really high on Turner, which isn't a negative.
I,
Um,
I mean, I rated Marcus Martin higher. I think he's more polished, technique-wise. He improved. He played left guard for the Trojans a year ago, 2 years ago, and he kind of had to improve that lower base and like the swivel a bit, so that kind of moved to center. I think he improved his lower base at lower strength, so I was really impressed with that. He's a really powerful player. I had a grade higher, but his grade is on being an interior lineman only, whereas Billy's grade is I would play him at tackle, so he has a slightly lower grade for me as a tackle than an interior lineman, but that I put more value into that position. So that's kind of like how I work out those kind of rankings. So I would pick Billy over Marcus, even though I have Marcus graded higher, if that makes sense.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think the way it worked out is the way I probably wanted it to work out. Even though entering the process, maybe that wasn't the case, but kind of seeing how Miami's done this and kind of seeing how the picks have worked out, I'm just so glad the Dolphins didn't get Mewhort. And I like Mewhort. I'm a Mewhort fan, but I gave him like a third to fourth round grade. I don't know what the Colts are thinking. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on the Colts, but good Lord, man, Ryan Grigson's going to have Jack Mewhort covering Jadeveon Clowney out here. I don't understand at all. I mean, he's a good player, but again, you're taking him at the 59th player in the draft when you've got guys who can contribute much more, much sooner than him.
Or shall we go down now and maybe we'll like pick out players that were sadder off the board and happy that have gone. So I think Charles Sims is one player. He went 2 spots later to the Buccaneers, and I kind of see him as kind of almost like a Matt Forte like player. I think he would be a nice versatile. He would have been a nice versatile tool to use in the passing game. And you can also run between the tackles. He has kind of the size of a 3-down back. So I think he would have been maybe if they hadn't moved. Maybe if Billy had gone before and they couldn't get up, maybe he would have been a target, although maybe Marino in the third round, maybe they're waiting to go lower. I did have someone from UAB Athletics, like an athlete, sent me a tweet about Darren Reeves and how the Dolphins have been really interested in him and his intangibles off the roof. And he's a really intriguing player. There's, I think, one game up on I think you can find it on YouTube or something, or maybe it's on Draft Breakdown. It's a game versus LSU, and he shows really good bursts. It's probably on one of the defensive tackles, like Amigo first, Ferguson cut up or something, and he shows like glimpses of really good bursts and through the hole. So maybe their Dolphins aren't kind of they've spent in free agency in that position. They're willing to wait until the third day with one of those acquired picks or to approach that kind of area at a better value. So that'll be a player to watch out for. We've obviously, I think Scott Critchin was a really good value for the Vikings. They've attacked that kind of like edge role quite a lot. So I think with Barr there, that's really interesting. It's kind of similar, obviously the same defensive scheme to Miami. And by the sound of things, they're going to be playing Barr as a strong side linebacker. So whether I think he's not as suitable as Jordan to play defensive ends, that kind of makes sense. I think third down situations will put his hand down. So I think Critchin adds kind of like almost that Olivier Vernon role where he can play first down, second down, at the end, and then maybe move inside on pass rushing situations and kind of be effective interior rush as well. So I thought that was a really good pick, and he was kind of a player I thought if he fell, Dolphins may find value there and finding a disruptive player in a position of strength. And then one player I was really happy. Well, there's maybe 2 players kind of in this range I was really happy to go. Trey Mason and Chris Borland, and obviously we've already talked about Borland. So maybe we'll start with him. I mean, I would have hoped he would have been off the board. he's got the smallest hands in the world. I mean, arm's length in the world, and I mean, he would have been a Mike linebacker. You're going to see offensive linemen, and I mean, he's got kind of like quick twitch movement, but he hasn't got sideline speed, and I kind of think that's what the Dolphins were looking for when they made this linebacker change, was that kind of range, sideline to sideline range, and so Borland would just be reverting back to the old norm, but with more physical limitations. He's got a really great football IQ, but I mean, you can't just pick the brain and then hope that your physical comp of Zach Taylor, not Zach Taylor,
Zach Thomas.
Yeah, Zach Thomas comes off. And so I think when people have to remember about player comparisons, it's often about style, look, not projecting what their talent is going to be. I think that's kind of a misconception. So if you think about Zach Thomas, he was a very rare player, and so it's very small chance that Chris Borland is going to be 1/10 of the player he was with those physical limitations. I think he had the smallest arm length of any linebacker ever at the combine in the last 10 years. So that's obviously not great. As it's like a physical attribute that is quite key to the position, shedding blocks. And then Trey Mason, I mean, he had a lot of interest with the Dolphins, so I was pretty scared that he would be picked. I mean, he has a lot of athletic traits that he kind of desired, but I have huge questions about his vision. I think everyone kind of just looks at the Gus Malzahn. I think what they're doing is they're impressed by Gus Malzahn, not by Trey Mason. And that's kind of where the mistake is, and it may be Greg Robinson to a degree as well. On that offensive line, and they just I mean, I've seen a bit of coach's film, and you just see huge holes, and he still makes some bad reads sometimes, so that's a huge worry to me. Maybe in the Rams, the amount they've invested in O-line. I heard even they were trying to trade up for Zach Martin in the back end of the first. So they're really attacking the run game. I think they're just going to not let Bradford throw the ball. So that'll be interesting. And I think that's kind of like, I mean, then we get into, there were some like kind of, I guess, like reaches. Jerick McKinnon, I'm pretty happy he's gone. He's just kind of like quarterback tweener, wildcat guy. I don't know. I think Vikings had a really strong draft up until then. So I don't know why they moved up for him. And so do you want to is there anyone else that you kind of are happy have left or was sad to see go?
I'll touch on a couple, I guess. Obviously, like I said, Chris Borland is a guy I didn't want any part of. For everything you mentioned, I think he's just a jack inside linebacker for a 3-4, someone that can just blitz. I think that's the only thing he really does well is he blitzes. It's really surprising that he actually went as early as he did, because I had talked with multiple scouts at the Senior Bowl, and the highest rated team was actually on him that I had heard. And then I didn't talk to every team, but I had heard from a couple teams that the 4th round was where the Seahawks had him. So to see the 49ers take him 77th overall was kind of surprising, but I mean, that's a team that can kind of afford that. They took Brandon Thomas at the end of the day too, so I mean, they're kind of a team that can afford a player to come in and play a very specialized role. But Borland's definitely that guy I'm glad to see gone. The guy that I'm kind of disappointed that he won't be on the board early tomorrow is Preston Brown, the inside linebacker out of Louisville. I don't love Preston Brown, but I liked him, and he was my number 3 inside linebacker that I had scouted. I didn't look too in depth on that inside linebacker position, but he's a thumper. He's a guy that definitely would fit what Kevin Coyle is used to working with. Decent athlete, not very flexible, not very fluid. So as far as coverage, he might be a liability. But for the Bills to go out and get him, not only does it help a division rival, but I think it kind of hurt Miami as well.
and we can kind of see him as a Spikes replacement. So like Spikes he's on a 1 year deal, and so I think they have similar games. They're both two down linebackers inside, and then move into a 3-4. So maybe they'll kind of groom him as that Mike linebacker, as a two down player, and see nickel packages out Kiko Roman. I think they've got an interesting kind of that front seven. I don't think he's not a playmaker or anything, but I think he's a good piece to use. I'm not exactly terrified about him, but I think any kind of usable rotational piece on that front seven they're just reloading, and I think that kind of helps to have some youth, and they're not fully investing in Spikes being able to deliver.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good pick for them. Touching on another one, I wanted the surprise pick, and I'm just going to touch on it real quick, was the Seahawks taking Justin Britt out of Missouri, the offensive tackle.
The second, right?
Yeah, they took him at the 64th pick. That was shocking. Like, that was a guy I had like 6th to 7th round, just like dude that might get drafted. That was shocking to me.
Yeah, I thought that was quite interesting. I'll just find my notes on him, 'cause I think he kind of has like prototype size. I think he's like 6'6", if I can remember. Yeah, he's like 6'6". He's kind of got short arms, so that's kind of interesting. Obviously, Seahawks have like the same zone blocking scheme. I guess I think they're looking at this being kind of something that a lot of teams look at, is the 20-yard shuttle when they're looking at zone blocking linemen, and they want to be under that 480. And so he's at 4'6'9". So perhaps that's kind of like a metrics pick somewhat, and like metrics with SEC combination. I thought that was a huge reach for me. I mean, there's a load of players I'd rather take, but maybe they're going for, they do need a tackle, and I guess that kind of shows again kind of how this tackle class, it really was a cliff dive that kind of people weren't expecting in regards to talent. Well, there's quite a few players we were like really high on as kind of like potential Dolphins, with Philip Gaines, Dante Moncrief, Josh Huff, and Dry Archer. They're all kind of players I think were linked somewhat to the Dolphins, and they were all like players thought could have, or the offensive players I think were more role players other than Moncrief. I think he was a really interesting player, and he was the one. He was, as I think I said earlier, he was the one player ahead above Landry when they took him at that spot. But just because of that kind of the versatility he has, I think he's a bit more raw and less refined player. So I think you could be right where they kind of feel they're not necessarily win now, but they need production now, whether that's from a media kind of standpoint of what happened last year with the rookie class, and they kind of felt they needed to have a better image of the draft class. I think that could maybe be an interesting idea. I think there is kind of like a new false perception that every draft pick has to be an instant performer, and if they look bad in a preseason game, they're instantly a bust. So maybe we've seen with that Landry pick, they went for the more proven player over kind of upside. Whereas with Billy, I think it went with upside over a proven player. So that's kind of interesting how like they've kind of combined different philosophies throughout the draft relative, which I did a small piece for Findepth on kind of different draft scenarios and kind of played out relative like a couple of these kind of ideas. So there was one where we called it kind of a reach to get Moses in the first, which we can like translate that now as drawing James in the first. Then it was picking an upside player and easily in the second, which we could come to see as going up for Billy Turner. So you have that safe pick, and then you invest in risk to kind of even out that investment. Another interesting, I think, a player that was surprised to go really high was Chris Watt, Zach Martin's left guard. I think he was. I think he's a bit overrated. I liked him at first look. He's like a technical player, but I don't think he's going to be a starter. Or I would be surprised if he even made a roster. I had him as a 7th round pick, I think. So that was a bit of a reach for me. And then I think the pick I really liked was Philip Gaines to the Chiefs. I think that was really interesting. And that could have some trade ramifications as well.
Yeah, I thought that was a wonderful pick. I know that they had been shopping Flowers, one of their current cornerbacks on the roster. I thought the Gaines was a wonderful value pick. I had him as an early second rounder, and we haven't really seen that cornerback run start yet. We only saw a couple cornerbacks go on day 2. We saw Gaines. We also saw, as I run through here, Dexter McDougal to the Jets, which is a nice pick if he's healthy, but was a little too early for my blood.
Where did he go? That was in the second round, wasn't it?
Lamarcus Joyner to the Rams.
And he's we kind of talked about him. He's kind of like a versatile player. I think he may end up playing safety or nickel corner. He's a bit undersized, but I think the Saints went for Jean-Baptiste.
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, it was really quiet in the cornerback group. So maybe that plays into, although Philip Gaines I think would have been a target for them, they showed interest into. There's a couple of maybe we'll get into it, or do you want to go into kind of now players that we see as a third day kind of target? So maybe if we we'll start with the cornerback group since we're talking about, I think Shaq Richardson from Arizona, he could be a target for them. He's going to fall, but there's going to be, I've got so many cornerbacks on my board left, it's pretty ridiculous. I think, and it's interesting that we saw kind of like the 5 consensus guys go in the first round, and normally you see almost 15 corners go in the top 2 rounds, generally athleticism being coveted more than anything else. It's kind of a position where you want that athleticism and burst. So I think it's quite interesting that quite a lot of the athletic players, all the Florida kids, then get picked. And Rashad Raylands, Aaron Colvin, Ross Cockrell, there's a lot of talent left on the board, and I think it's a position where the Dolphins need to address depth. And if I've talked about this a lot, how nickel is the base package with having 3 corners on the field. So whether that is, regardless of who that is, we have 5 corners that can start, and potentially Jimmy Wilson will be looked at as safety with Delmas having kind of injury concerns or durability concerns.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting to see kind of the approach that they take on day 3. I know we've talked at length about day 3 in the past, but one guy I've got my eye on is at inside linebacker is Avery Williamson. This is a guy, for me, he had a day 2 value. I'm not surprised he slid to day 3, especially when you look at all of the skill positions and how those have kind of worked out. But with the Dolphins missing out on Preston Brown, I think they do need to grab a linebacker at some point. It's just too big of a need area. They just don't have much depth behind there. So I'd like to see Avery Williamson out of Kentucky, 6'1", 246, similar to Preston Brown. I actually have him as a higher grade as Preston Brown. So I think he's an option. Jordan Zumwalt out of UCLA. I have him as a day 3 grade, but just barely behind Williamson. Another guy, 6'4", 235. He's maybe not a middle linebacker per se, or if he is, he needs to add.
I think if you're going to play him inside, he's kind of projects more to that kind of will inside linebacker. I think he has like flashes of Kiko. He kind of has a nose for the ball. You always see him in the backfield. I really like him, and he's like an aggressive player. So I'd quite like that as a pick. My 2 highest players on my board at the moment are both outside linebackers, with Telvin Smith and Kevin Pierre-Louis. So I think they could be an interesting target. We haven't really seen them be that interested in will linebackers, strangely. I think one that again is an Arizona player which they've been kind of interested in quite a bit, was Marquise Flowers, and he's really raw, but like an athlete, he takes really bad angles. But he's kind of he has quite good instincts, but just really bad kind of depth perception of angles and not very good technique tackle-wise. I think Telvin's probably going to drop from kind of those drug concerns at the combine. He's undersized. I know some people want him to be a safety, which is I don't think you should do. Just let him be by the line of scrimmage as a nickelbacker. He's only a 1-year starter, so that's another kind of knock. So I think but I think he's a really exciting player. I'm surprised he didn't get drafted. Kevin Pierre-Louis, I think he's a 4-year starter. Played next to Luke Kuechly, so he kind of has maybe more prestige and more of a leadership role. And he's kind of like that same kind of ilk, like a nickelbacker, and again like really aggressive, athletic players, good in coverage. So they could be, if I were drafting for the Dolphins, they would be my day 3 targets, along with my next highest rated player is Devontae Freeman, the running back from FSU. So those would be kind of the players I'd be targeting and kind of have a need at those areas as well. So do you reckon there's any particular positions they're going to want to address, or do you think the O-line's spoken for now? Do you think wide receivers spoken for now, or they still, if they find value, they'll want to build competition?
I think from what we've seen so far is that this is a very cut and dry. Although they said BPA, I mean, they've kind of gone BPA, but there's no real true concept of best player available, because you can stack your board to say, well, best player available is always going to be at a position of need. So, you can't really criticize not going quote unquote BPA every round.
I think you're going to focus on the position in which you're looking for players to be good. So then you either find more that you like, or you find more that you dislike, and within your grade you can. And I think this will be something teams do, is they input a positional value. So each class they will input this position is of higher value than any other. So for most people, quarterback would inherently always have a positional value, but then unless you have a franchise quarterback, then maybe you take that position, you do a reverse, and you have a lower positional value. And so if that player still is graded out really high, okay, this guy is clearly our best player by miles. We've even put a negatory positional value onto this group. That's how I would do it anyway. So I assume teams are smarter than me and would do something along those kind of lines of you're not reaching, but you're prioritizing, but you're putting a numerical value onto it, so it's within a controlled environment, the reach.
Yeah, I think we could definitely see a running back go at some point. I hope that day 3 is going to be a day where they're just going to be able to take those top-rated players on those boards. As you said, Devontae Freeman is one of my top overall players left. He is my top running back left over Isaiah Crowell, and Crowell's not going to be in the mix for the Dolphins. So considering that, Freeman's easily my best running back left, my number 3 overall back, actually. If he's there in round 4, I don't think running back's a big need, but I think you definitely need to consider him there. The only position I could see them doubling down on right now is wide receiver if Martavis Bryant falls them in the 4th round somehow. By them moving back a little bit in the 4th round, that might not be possible because ultimately he's 6'4", 211. Yes, he's got major concerns as far as character and, if he's devoted to the game, but that 4th round is exactly where you take a guy like that. Once he gets to the NFL, he may find that that's more suited to who he is, and that fits what he wants to do a little bit more. I mean, we see athletes get bored in college and come to the NFL and get better as far as their focus. So I think wide receiver is probably the only one left that we could see them double down on. I think our dreams of Garrett Scott from Marshall might not be realistic now, but he could also go maybe sixth or seventh round, and at that point, it's all hell breaks loose as far as trying to predict those 2 rounds. So maybe tackle, maybe they grab another tackle. It would be pretty surprising though, and it would probably mean the end of a guy like Nate Garner, which I don't know why you'd get rid of him at this point, but that's just pure speculation. Um,
Jason Fox not necessarily has a cemented roster spot. There's like all others, they're from Canada. There's a couple of other guys that don't necessarily have a roster spot, and I think with a guy like Garrett Scott, he has positional versatility, having played left guard and tackle. So you're kind of getting more than he could be a practice squad player even. I think there's only a couple of teams that are interested in him. I know the Seahawks were, and I think the Jets showed interest. So, well, that'll be maybe an interesting to see who values him highly. I know he's been in the Dolphins building, so I would love if they got Billy Turner and Garrett Scott. I mean, those would be my 2 jerseys, and I'll just wear them. One white, one aqua, and that's all the clothes I own. And do you think kind of defensive tackle, edge rush? Do you think there's kind of like anyone in that kind of area you think they may look at? Obviously, okay, maybe we should talk about kind of like roster construction and how many edge rushers would you have on a roster there? So obviously we have 4 at the moment, edge rushers. We have about 5 interior D linemen, so that's a core of 9. Do you think that's kind of like a set core? Do you think maybe Francis or Shelby are kind of going to be challenged at all, or do you think that's going to be kind of an area in free agency they attack, looking at kind of like developmental raw projects put on the practice squad?
I think they'll definitely address it right after the draft with the priority free agents. They've put a lot of work into Shelby and especially Francis developing those guys. And then the other kid that they let go at the end of the preseason last year was a kid that had some upside too. I can't remember his name, but Casey Rogers does such a good job developing this defensive line that I'm not sure it's a position that they need to really address unless if Daquan Jones out of Penn State falls to them. Or maybe even Justin Ellis out of
Justin Ellis, Reed. They've shown interest in Corin Reed at least, and maybe a Daquan Jones. So I think I'm surprised those 4 guys were there, considering we saw a lot of reaches early, like Ego Ferguson went really early. I like Harry Fortin. I think that was kind of a slightly better pick. Jay Bromley was a real reach. So that's kind of interesting. And maybe should we go? So I think if maybe Kerr or a Reed is like a really high character guy, Princeton, so he could be. I think maybe we haven't really touched on everyone's been a captain so far and high character players. So Reed kind of fits in that. He has kind of a really interesting story coming from Harlem, and both his parents are pastors, I believe, and so I think he could be kind of a player that kind of fits that the way they're trying to build the locker room through the draft. And then I guess the 2 positions where kind of people thought they may approach in the first couple of days, tight end and safety. The tight end board's pretty much obliterated with those compensatory picks at the end with Crockett Gilmore and Richard Rodgers going. So I've got maybe 6 guys that are draftable now as tight ends. So AC Leonard, he's kind of like that raw move tight end, really athletic, and really doesn't really know what to do with himself, but he kind of has the tools you're looking for, has that athleticism. Then there's Arthur Lynch, who I think is really interesting, and Joe Duncan. I think he could be a really interesting player. I think maybe he'll be a player the Patriots look at quite early on. I've heard they've got some interest in him. I think Gator Hoskins, I don't think he'll be a target. He's basically Charles Clay. So I don't understand why they would look at them. Maybe Xavier Grimball's a real late kind of pick. And then there's a couple of guys, I can't remember his name, the guy from the U who was like a basketball player, and kind of being like, there's news stories about him being the new Jimmy Graham. I haven't been able to find kind of, was it like Blanchflower or something? Or was that?
Yeah, out of UMass. Yeah,
Okay.
I watched like
From
half
the
of
U,
his.
University of Miami, and he didn't even play football last year; just played basketball.
Yeah, I don't know what that guy's name is. I think he'll be a priority free agent. Um, I I haven't really heard much else about him after his individual workout or at his regional workout. I just know he's super athletic, but I mean, Graham, you knew how athletic he was. Like he was unbelievably athletic. So I don't think this guy's quite on that level. If he was, I think he would have already been picked actually, or at least he'd be in that fourth round discussion. So maybe he goes round 6 or 7 if he's really that athletic. But I think Graham was more of a lucky pick that just worked out. I don't think that that's going to become the norm where guys just declare themselves a football player because at least Graham had a year of experience, and I think that's a big difference. This guy's never gotten hit by a collegiate athlete, let alone an NFL player, so I think that's going to go a long ways. Although the tight end position is extremely weak, I think at this point, like Xavier Grimble is my top-rated tight end that's realistically going to get drafted, and I know I'm higher on him than most others. So, and it'd be interesting to see where a guy like Arthur Lynch goes to. He's more of like a well-rounded tight end, that limited upside type that you get him in and he's going to contribute year one. But I mean, I'm just not really in love with this tight end class. Like if they can get Grimble in like the 6th or 7th round, I won't say anything. Or maybe with like that extra 5th round pick that they got, that would be fine. But I mean, there's just not a lot of upside outside of AC Leonard that we talked about.
We've got a young room, and me and Sims played pretty badly. Agnew didn't really get an opportunity with Sherman. He was used predominantly as a fullback, which was just absurd for a player that was used as a wide receiver in Missouri. So, I mean, we won't go into that anymore. But maybe we'll talk about the safety class then, 'cause that pretty much got untouched. There's 3 safeties taken off. I mean, and we talk about kind of Joyner being that kind of hybrid player, like slot corner, kind of like a Tyrann Mathieu-esque kind of player, just move around. So there's still a lot of safeties on the board. Obviously, with the 3 Premier guys going in the first round, or 4, I mean, and 3 and then Pryor. So maybe we want to talk about kind of the guys who you think that kind of fit this hybrid look safety group, and they may look for someone to come in behind Delmas if they're deciding that Wilson's going to be a slot corner predominantly, if they don't look at corner, or they just want kind of another body back there. There's kind of only Wilson, Delmas, Rashad Jones, and then basically special teams players.
Yeah, if they decide to go safety, they've got a big choice of options. There's guys for every fits and flavors. If they want to do like the mirror safeties type, they can go with a guy kind of like Ahmad Dixon. With what they currently have, Dixon kind of fits that. He's like a poor man's Jones. Deion Bailey's a little bit better version of him out of USC. He's kind of a guy. He's an undersized guy as far as his frame and weight, but he did everything that USC asked him to do, and when they asked him to expand his role, he was actually much better against Fresno State because they had him doing a lot more things. So you have to wonder, I mean, obviously it's just one bowl game, so you have to be careful projecting off that one bowl game, but Bailey offers a little bit of value. I wouldn't put safety high on the value list, so if they're going to take a safety, I would actually recommend taking Western Kentucky Jonathan Dowling. He's a free safety, 6'3", 190, guy with just ridiculous upside as far as physical traits. Absolute beast athletically. So if they're going to roll the dice on the safety, I would go with a guy like him. Tore his ACL, so he's going to be, he's a tough guy. He played through the season off that with that torn ACL. I think he played like 9 weeks with it or something. So he's a guy that he should be coming back full strength by the season. I'm not sure if that's, I haven't looked too much into that as far as being for sure on that, but I think they need to take a guy with some upside because Delmas and Wilson can hold it down this season, and then we can kind of reevaluate next year. Another guy, if they want a guy that just to have a body back there, Dayton Lowe out of Oklahoma State. I talked about him before. He's a guy that can come in, play at either spot, especially with mirror safeties, and just do his job. He's, bring his lunchbox, and he's going to be able to do his job just fine. You're not even going to notice him back there because he's not going to screw up. So, and as I say that, you're not going to notice him, I say that as a positive. And if they want a guy, willing to take a guy with some character risk, but with high upside, Maurice Alexander out of Utah State, suspended for a year in 2012 for off-the-field stuff, but he's 6'1", 220. If he lives up to his potential, he could be the next Cam Chancellor outside of his height. I mean, he's not quite as tall, but the dude is physical. The dude is a beast at strong safety. And then we've talked about Marcuston Huff out of Wyoming as well before, the ultimate tool kind of guy. He's probably like the 80% version of Jimmy Ward, except for maybe a slightly better athlete.
He is on tape. He looks he's a bit more. He's got like a bit quicker tip twitch in the hips.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And so I think
Vereen is the guy I would go after. Brock Vereen and Mark Christensen Huff are the two guys I really like. And I've got like Sean Parker Hyde, but I think he kind of fits more just that strong safety and the box player. I mean, he can cover a bit, but I think if we're having mirror players, you don't really want that as much. Where I think Brock Vereen and Marcus Simpson Huff, they can go deep more often and play single high if you want them to, and they can also come in the box and not going to be a liability in the run game. So those would be the guys I think you're getting. I've got Brock Vereen as a high third rounder, so I think you're getting good value there. But Telvin and KPL, they're high second rounders for me. So if we can get either of those fall to the fourth, maybe Telvin's off for character issues. The only other players I have I've got quite a few players in the second round: Abadera, Shaq Evans, Yaden Watkins, Aaron Lynch, who's obviously a raw upside player, and it's interesting he's fallen so far. I kind of knocked him back for kind of that Central Florida year and the weight concerns, kind of fluctuating weight. He lost a load of weight after he transferred, and then kind of never looked the same again. And maybe there's I guess there was one pick that we didn't talk about in the division, and that was Jimmy Garoppolo to the Patriots. So maybe we'll finish off on that. So what do you think about the Mallet and the Gabbating Garoppolo?
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think Mallet will go probably fairly cheap, either like a fourth round, maybe a fifth round pick. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to tell because I don't know what the value is of trading him for that. I mean, they've been holding on to him forever, and it seems like he's in trade rumors every year, yet they hold on to him. So I don't know. It's really hard because they have no leverage now if they want to trade him. Houston seems perfectly content to ride it out with Fitzpatrick. So I'm not sure if that's really a match. Maybe for that fourth round pick, I mean, you take a flyer on him for a year. And that's probably a fair value. I know that I had sent out a tweet saying, I'd rather take a fifth rounder on Keith Wenning than Mallet. And absolutely I would, but for Houston's situation, and actually, no, let me take that back because I'm looking at who I have available at quarterback with David Fales and Logan Thomas. Actually, there's no way I'd actually give up a fourth rounder for Ryan Mallet now that I say that.
I think because with Mallet, it's all arm strength. And I know he was in that class, he graded out pretty high for a lot of scouts. He was a first rounder on the field. It was off the field that kind of made him drop. So I think was like scout reports that came out that he was an NMN kind of character. But yeah, so I think it's an interesting pick. Maybe it's kind of another investment in trying to nurture someone. I'm not sure he will be Tom Brady's successor. I've seen a couple of kind of articles about how Brady might not have long left. But I think he'll be at least another 4 or 5 years. I don't think Garoppolo is going to be much competition in that regard. But it'll be interesting
Yeah, it was,
what they do with Mallet anyway. Whether I think potentially they could. I think I remember hearing, was it 2 years ago? They it must have been 2, 3 years ago, and they turned down a second rounder Tebow for Mallet trade, and they turned that down. Obviously, that's a different second rounder to in this class, where it's a stronger class, and that would have been a low second rounder instead of a high second rounder. So maybe that kind of changes it a bit. But yeah, it's interesting. I think it'll be interesting to see kind of where that goes. I think is one positive. It's one player though not seeing the field from this class.
yeah. I mean, I like Garoppolo. I had him as my number 4 quarterback, but that was more so that I didn't like really anybody past Derek Carr, who was my number 3 quarterback. I had Garoppolo as a late second round value. Um, I mean, he's the perfect developmental quarterback in my eyes. I mean, he's got an elite trait and pretty good accuracy, good arm strength. I mean, he's a guy that you take a flyer on, and he's good for the Patriots. Again, I don't think he really probably ever sees the field. He's probably going to be the next Mallet in 3 years. They'll probably ship him off for a mid-round pick. So maybe it ends up being a wasted pick.
His motion is really beautiful, but
Yeah.
that doesn't really matter when you shit yourself when with motion. So
Right, right. I mean, that's the thing. Like watching him, it's like I don't even know because he's facing guys that would never sniff the NFL coming at him, and he's able to unload it so quick that it's like you kind of don't look at everything else. But when I went back and watched him, there was definitely. I mean, there's obviously concern. So let me throw this out there for you. If the Dolphins are picking at 125 and they're looking at Logan Thomas, Devontae Freeman somehow, and let's throw like a random cornerback in there. I'll say Jalen Watkins, which I can't believe he's still on the board, but let's say Jalen Watkins. Who are you taking?
Well, I would probably take Jalen Watkins just for I had him and Freeman pretty much level grade. So, and I think potentially, although I really do like Freeman, and I think actually maybe I'll take Freeman because of the running back class is kind of disintegrating, whereas I know he can maybe get another corner I really like later on. I do think Logan Thomas is a real target for the Dolphins. During the combine, Zach Taylor was by his side the whole time talking to him. He was also at the Virginia Tech Pro Day. He went in for a meeting, a visit to the team, so I think he will be a target. I was surprised he hasn't been picked already, considering some of the players that have been taken. I think I have, just from a quick glance, I have about 20 players taken, maybe 25 with a lower grade than Logan Thomas taken already, and like significant, like different bandwidth of range of talent. And I mean, he just has all the tools you look for, like size, arm, athleticism, and if you're not forcing him to play, Devlin has no upside. Matt Moore is a waste of money. I'd much rather go out firing all guns blazers with Logan Thomas for a game than just let Matt Moore chuck it deep for 50 yards and for a pick. So that's just me. I mean, preseason would be so much more exciting. So seeing sacks and naked bootlegs, would actually see some athletic plays, and I guess that kind of like size and athleticism would translate somewhat to Tannehill's potential as like in zone read plays, but with more. And I mean, there's like always talk about having like gimmick plays for Tebow getting on the field. I mean, in theory, you could get Logan Thomas on the field as like a tight end or as a wildcat QB that is actually a quarterback. But I mean, I personally wouldn't want to do that. I want to have my franchise quarterback the ball in his hand every down. But I mean, he could play tight end. That's kind of like, to me, that's his floor, is a developmental tight end in 3 years. And so if you look at the kind of pick that way, it's like, okay, so we might get a really amazing quarterback. The worst we get is another, we can like put him on a minimum contract and try him out as a tight end. That doesn't really hurt. I throw out a scenario then for you. There's David Fales, Jared Abadaris, and Dakota Dozier and Telvin Smith.
Oh boy. Well, I mean, with David Fales, you kind of know what you're getting. You're getting a solid backup spot starter. He's actually, I would compare him not play style to Matt Moore, but as far as career path, I think it'll be like Matt Moore. You could see him getting into the game and, making a star out of a player and just being a really solid player. But then if you start to, get him in there 4, 5, 6 weeks in a row, you might see the flaws coming out. You're gonna see the defenses react, and I'm not sure if he can adjust to those reactions by the defense. However, I do like him for the Dolphins. I think he'd fit well with what we do. Jared Abadaris, I like him. I have him as a early 4th-round pick, which I know is lower than what our combined is on him. But what he does well would allow us to get rid of Brian Hartline, but I'm not sure if in the 4th round if that's what we need to do. I'd much rather, if we're going to go wide receiver, take a bigger, more physical type, number 1 potential type receiver. And then Dakota Dozier, he'd be a nice pick, but I think considering who we've taken so far, I'm not sure if he's a need all of a sudden. If we get one more offensive lineman this draft, I think we'd be set for a long time. But is that really a need at this point? I probably wouldn't put it on our needs list. And then Telvin Smith is the best overall player on my board out of those choices. He definitely is a great athlete who would bring something new to this team that we haven't had, and besides Deion Jordan, one of those type of athletes that you can just throw out there and let him clean up plays and such. But ultimately, is he a year 1 impact guy? Probably not. So it's a really tough call. It'd probably be between Smith because of the overall talent and potential, and David Fales. But I'd probably go Fales. I just think they needed to get a developmental quarterback in there soon and get rid of Pat Devlin immediately. And ultimately next year, then Matt Moore would be let go. Just let him walk away, and then you draft another guy. I wouldn't hesitate drafting another guy because I believe in drafting a quarterback every year. So I would go Fales.
Okay, shall we end it with, say, 3 players that we want to see the Dolphins take in some shape or form tomorrow, whether it's draft pick or free agent. So I'll go with my 3. I mean, I'm not going to surprise on the first one. I think everyone can guess it's going to be Garrett Scott. I'm going to go with Darren Reeves, the UAB running back. I think he's really interesting. I think he can be great value. And he's played well against SEC competition, even though only a couple of times. I think he could be that kind of scat back they're looking for, flex out of the backfield, can run between the tackles. And then last one is Terrence Feely. I think he's just an absolute beast of an athlete. I think he can put him in, just let's have 5 defensive ends. He can line on behind Cameron Wake as well, and just have a really deep, exciting core. He kind of he's a bit bigger than Deion Jordan, he's a bit stronger. He gets up, he's got some real technical flaws where he stands up really tall, but he's got a good first step. If he doesn't stand up as tall, that first step's going to be even more effective. And I'll throw out one more name that I kind of haven't really spoke about much, but I think he could be really interesting, and that's Sullivan Groves from, I think, Cal Poly, and he's like a defensive tackle, and he's really interesting. He's got really good first step. I think he'd be a priority free agent. He's got a good first step. I think a scout was at a Dolphins scout was at his pro day where he put up some really interesting numbers, particularly in athletic scoring. So he could be an interesting player to watch for a priority free agent. And I think this is where we'll kind of see that analytical side come out more, where particularly in the unrestricted free agents, they'll be looking for kind of, or undrafted free agents, they'll be looking for the players with just athletic traits to project to some sort of NFL success. And then obviously on top of that, we'll probably see a gunner at some point. So whether that's Walt Aikens? I think he was, a lot of people tipped him as kind of going late day 3. He's kind of more of a press corner, I see him as. But he had a lot of gunner experience, and obviously R.G. Stanford left, and he was kind of the best special teams player other than our kickers. So I think that will be a pick potentially, if not, or maybe with the way the corner class is kind of dropping. Normally you'd have a corner or a safety is going to be your gunner. So that could be interesting, something to look out for, and maybe to kind of like tether your hopes if you see a corner come off, it's probably a gunner.
Yeah, the guys I'll go with are, I'll kind of go round by round. I'll just give a pick for every round, and then a name for free agency. If they can get Jalen Watkins in the 4th round, that would be a tremendous value. I can't believe he's still on the board. I have him as a mid-second round pick, and I think he was highly viewed by NFL teams. Maybe not obviously not super high, but I think it's kind of well known that he's the best Florida cornerback. You consider the athlete that he is, and I'm just surprised there hasn't been a cornerback run because of the importance of the position right now, especially. The fact that Pierre Desir out of Lindenwood's still out there is incredible. Yeah. He had a borderline first-round grade from me. And, I mean, I know teams don't go off my board, but, I mean, dude's 6'1", 200 pounds, plays press, plays zone, great instincts and ball skills. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, he was so good at the Senior Bowl after this first day and a half that he looked he looked better than Justin Gilbert. And that's part of the reason why I have him rated higher than Justin Gilbert. So, but going back to Jalen Watkins.
I think because of the depth, that's why, because it's a bit more relative depth in that class, that could be potentially why there hasn't been as much, because we've seen kind of like interior D-line go really early and be pushed up, and potentially that's because there isn't that talent, so people are having to reach for those players, and they're thinking, oh, well, we can wait and get a corner later.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's part of it, and I also think that you look at instant impact. These teams have the needs at the interior D-line. That's always a position you're going to need depth at. And you do at corner as well, but like I said, I mean, I've got 38 cornerbacks graded as draftable out of 41, and the other guys are borderline. So it's an extremely deep cornerback class, and especially when you break it down into systems, you're going to be able to get a guy that fits your system in the 5th or 6th round. He might not be, an all-star, but he's going to be a contributor. So I would expect to see a cornerback run soon, but if Watkins can be there for the Dolphins, that would be a great pick. If not, I'd love to get my guy out of Northwest Missouri State in the 5th or 6th round, Brandon Dixon, 5'11", 199, so he fits that size, that Miami currently collects. Less than 6 foot is usually what they have. So he would bring a lot to the table as far as press upside, but then also instant zone capability. Just really good instincts, great athlete. Again, your only concern is instant impact. Can he instantly impact the team? So I'll go with those two in the secondary. Guy that I think that's a real option is Avery Williamson. Talked about him before out of Kentucky. I think they've got to get an inside linebacker at some point. He would be the guy I'd like to see them grab. At quarterback, I'd like to see them get, if they don't get a guy here in the 4th round, Brock Jensen out of North Dakota State. It goes back to fundamentals. He's a career backup type. And you look at the value, though, he's 6'3", 225. If you get him in the 6th or 7th round, that's the type of guy that a franchise like the Packers would take, develop him. When the starter gets hurt, he comes in and does a Matt Flynn. That's going to be Brock Jensen, in my opinion, if he goes to the right situation. So Jensen's a really good caliber player, especially in the 6th or 7th round.
And we already have his college left tackle for him to feel comfortable behind in 3 years.
Exactly. Well, with the North Dakota State Dolphins.
And I think that's, I mean, that could be like a serious thing to talk about. We've kind of seen this trend with Juwan James having a Tennessee partner. We've seen the coaching staff and the free agency kind of mirror. They've come from similar places. So there is kind of a trend. We saw obviously that it seems a lot of people came from the Texans. So I think they're trying to, in some way, manufacture a kind of leadership or camaraderie. We also saw two players from the Rams, two players from the Lions. So it's quite interesting that kind of like dynamic they've kind of bought in areas. And I think we will see kind of after tomorrow, we'll see some roster turnover of the front office. With I expect probably quite a lot of scouts and player personnel will be moved on. Kind of Hickey will bring in his own guys. So I think they're trying to build a base of players that have a relationship to kind of avoid that issue. So Brock Jensen could be a real possibility to fight out with Jordan Rodgers and Pat Devlin for that kind of third spot.
Yeah, for sure. So I would definitely agree with that. Last name I'm gonna throw out there is Delaware's Zach Kerr, defensive lineman. I think he's a great option in the fourth or fifth round, depending on how the board falls. I mean, right now he could be a fifth rounder, sixth rounder, but we've seen a lot of interior D linemen, so he's a guy that you take and develop if you're not confident in that defensive line depth, especially with Stark's situation in the future. He's a guy I would watch out for. I think that he could come in and play 300 snaps, and you wouldn't really notice a huge drop off from what they currently have on the roster.
He has connections to Miami as well. He was on the Georgia team with AJ Francis, and then he moved to or they had that kind of mass exodus, and AJ Francis stayed at Georgia, and Kerr moved on to Delaware. So he kind of has a friend in the building as well. So if they were looking to kind of have another kind of tight group in another room, or like they were looking at defensive tackle as a particular area that they wanted to improve, he kind of fits a couple of boxes in that kind of senses. He's a proven commodity. They know what they're getting because they have someone they trust, know him, and they know they'll have. I think I've seen of late AJ Francis and Kerr tweeting each other a lot as well, so still actively communicate. So that could be interesting. I really like him. I have a late second round grade on him. I think he'd be perfect in this scheme. I think he'd be kind of that. You could have him and Mitchell rotating as that kind of 1-0 tech shades player. I think he's pretty much got the size as well just to be able to two gap if you wanted him to. So you're getting kind of a bit more scheme versatility, which they're kind of lacking. That could be one area they look at. Did Ed Stinson go in the end? So remember, there was kind of talk of him being linked when there was that whole Alabama Cyrus Quandro. They like him, they don't like Mosley stuff. And was it Kaufman who dropped that? It was like one of the beat writers. And they dropped Ed Stinson, which I really didn't understand, as a potential third-day pick.
Yeah, that was Abrahamson. Yeah.
I don't know if I don't even have him off on the board. That's how much I don't think he fits scheme. I don't have him on the board. I think he might be picked though. But maybe that. So I think that they definitely are looking at defensive tackle if you just look at the visits they've had. So I would highlight Quan Reed as potentially the player they take, but we'll see. I think there's a lot of guys on the board that you're getting really good value. I mean, I've got, I think, 30, 40 players in the third, second day range, so a third, second round range. So you're getting kind of, I think that move down, you're still getting value and they're getting the player they like, so kind of like that. It's nice that we've got an extra pick tomorrow as well, even if it's a slightly later weight.
All right, man. I think we wrapped it up pretty good. Dolphins are.
We'll be doing a show tomorrow from the end of the 6th round, and we'll have a couple of guests on to kind of talk like general draft and what their opinions on the Dolphins draft class, and we'll try and go into the UDFAs a bit, and that's what I really want. That's all I care about. And we've got Billy, and let's just get some freak UDFAs inside the building. That's when real fun happens. So yeah, I guess we'll just do that until like we've got Garrett Scott and we can leave. Right, well, here's the Billy. Right, let's finish this.